Bytes on Nooga Radio. I'm Russell Stroud, and joining me, well, I guess I'm joining him, actually, technically, is Jim McCoon from Legal Bytes, our show here on Nooga Radio. Jim, thank you for being here. So tell us a little bit about beginning of the year planning. We're actually, technically, we're at the end of the year, but what can I do in the near future to prepare myself for the new year in a legal sense? Is there anything I need to do specifically?
Well, other than, are you talking about financial planning? Are you talking about estate planning? Or are you talking about, so yes, as you can tell, there are things that
there are obviously things I can do.
And certainly, rather than your attorney, your accountant would be someone who could help you there with respect to, your attorney can do the work once we have the information, so you really need to talk to your accountants first. Shout out to all the CPAs.
Right.
For example, I've got a client who's contacted me recently about wanting to convert their business from one form of business to another form of business.
Okay.
Do it before person.
Now, I'm going to do something radical here for half a second. I'm going to have you switch microphones. I'm going to move it over to you because we have a cable problem, which is no big deal, generally speaking, but I want to just nip it in the bud before it becomes one. So I'm just going to move this over to you real quick.
Okay.
And please do continue.
This looks like something I'd be using in a church choir.
Well, feel free to sing, please.
You really don't want to talk about losing listeners. That would just be awful.
We are now killing 100% of our listenership. There we go.
All right, is that better?
That's much better.
All right. So so we're looking, and to do that, there were some good legitimate reasons to make the change or convert from an LLC to a PC or an LLC to a subchapter S, or like. And you look at them on the face, and there's really not a good reason. I mean, if you look at an LLC and you look at a subchapter S corporation, they both provide limited liability to the extent that you've got the corporate shield or the limited liability company shield that protects the members or the shareholders, so that you're protected from tort liabilities and contract liabilities personally, except to the extent you may have assumed them, or again, there's a few exceptions always in the law. But and from a ordinary handling of the funds standpoint, they look alike, because the LLC is treated like a partnership from a financial standpoint. So the operations and the profits and losses of the business flow down to the members. In a subchapter S, the operations of the company, the profits and the losses flow down to the shareholders. Okay. So they look very similar, but there are some reasons why you'd want to change them.
Well, I mean, they both have to exist as separate entities for a reason, right?
Right. Well, and they do, and they do, but you get into, and it gets in. Most of them get into the actual financial specifics of the company as to whether or not you choose one or the other. And in this situation, we're waiting for information from CPA on whether to make the conversion from one to the other. But for example, one consideration is the fact that if you are a subchapter S and you're a shareholder and you work for the company, then suddenly you're in a W-2 status.
Oh.
And so you have all the things that occur with respect to employment and withholdings and the like that occur there. If you're in a LLC and you're a member and you're working for it, you're not an employee. The IRS treats you as a partner, and therefore you can get a guaranteed payment, basically, that you receive. You can get a guaranteed draw each month that would be like a salary, but suddenly you're in a self-employment kind of status from the standpoint of there are no withholdings and the like, because you're not a W-2.
I see. So you're by signing a W-2, this is a tax form that says yes, and I'm an employee, and
the W-9 gives you the W-2 statement. You get it right.
These are all things I've never had to do, so I'm a little bit fuzzy on them. But
you're working here for free,
technically speaking. Yeah. Well, define free, but sure. But no, yeah, it's interesting because I see a lot of people, and I've talked to different people who work as entrepreneurs, who are very, very careful with how they operate regarding tax forms and all these kinds of things. And it's almost like a subculture of people who are trying to not get around the law, but trying to use the law in order to limit the amount of payments they have to make to the state or the feds or what have you. It's all very clever. It's all very interesting too, that there are these interesting differences that exist.
Well, and that with the reason to pay taxes if you don't have to pay taxes.
Right. Why would you pay something you don't need to?
Right. And the laws are set up that way to do that. So there would be no reason to incur the tax liability if you can avoid it. And so that's where your attorneys can help you, and your CPAs both are involved in helping to structure your business arrangement so that you can minimize what has to be taxed. I mean, for example, I had a client years ago that was setting up, and the question came up whether or not we wanted to set up an entity or not. And the big problem was in this business that they were in, there was a great amount of, or large amount of F&E tax, federal franchise and excise tax that was owed to the state each year. And I think, if I remember correctly, this is several years ago, it was over $36,000 that this small business would have to pay in F&E tax.
That's a lot of money.
If it was an entity. If it was not an entity, it wouldn't owe F&E tax. Our advice, don't create the entity. Well, you lose the protections of liability. But in that situation, we could buy a whole lot of liability insurance for less than $36,000.
I hope so anyway.
So what we did was we basically over-insured the business to provide all the protections to them personally, but did not set up the entity to avoid the F&E tax liability that we knew was going to be $36,000 or in excess of $36,000 at the time. Oh. So, why did we do that? Well, you think, well, why would you do this? Because there's no reason to pay taxes that purely the structure of the entity costs. So,
fair enough. Wow. I never thought about that. It's interesting how we get really hung up on, I'm starting a business, I need an LLC, I need a company, I need this separation from liability. But I guess you're bringing up, in not all cases, that's what you necessarily want or need to do.
That's why you need someone to look at what that company is going to do and what other taxes it may be incurring before you go out there and set up the entity.
Now, what would be your advice for someone who's looking into starting their own home business, maybe?
You mean working out of their home?
Potentially, yeah. Maybe a side job or what have you.
Or a home business, meaning working on home.
No. A business from their home.
One, find you a good CPA. I think you need someone that can handle those affairs for you. To keep the business separate from your personal finances if you're going to have an entity. And that's the hardest thing to do, especially in a startup, is not letting the funds flow back and forth too easily between checkbooks. But if you're setting up an entity, and I would set up an entity ordinarily, especially in a home business where sounds like it's going to be a service business if you're working out of your home. And so you're probably not looking at a great deal of state tax liability issues, but you're looking more at whether or not we can protect the assets we already have. And that's why I would set up the entity at that point in time with either an LLC or a subchapter S corporation. And then make sure you've got a great accountant that can help you handle keeping your finances straight and the like, and making sure that all the dollars are properly accounted for. And then the big thing is we've all heard, not everybody, but a lot of us have heard the term alter ego. Mm-hmm. Alter ego claims or piercing the veil claims come in where the separate existence of the business entity is not honored by the shareholder or the insiders of the members of the entity.
So they're acting almost as the same person as
right.
The
That's thing. You're taking money out of the left pocket, putting it in the right pocket, right, and saying, "Gee, I've protected that," and you really haven't, because if you're using business funds to pay your personal obligations and writing that out of the operating account of the business, if you're flowing back and forth, if you're buying supplies for your business but suddenly end up in the pantry, right, it's where you're using them and that kind of things, then what you've done is you basically disregarded the business entity and the separateness of the business from you. And creditors of the business can then take action to pierce that veil that the law gives you, the liability veil that comes down. They can take an option to try to pierce that veil make the claim that the business is just an alter ego of you, the individual, and you vice versa, and make claims through. So that would be one of my major as the attorney. There's lots of advice in startups as far as trying to make a big splash, ride the wave, all the things you hear in the startup culture.
Right.
But from a liability standpoint or from a legal planning standpoint, those are the biggest things I would advise.
I think careful planning is far more important than jumping in head first.
Right. Especially if you're bringing in investors. Goodness
Right.
gracious, if you're bringing in investors and you're not honoring that, then you've created a whole nother series of liabilities.
Not only are you not being entirely truthful financially, you're also cheating them as business people too, and that's a huge problem.
Sure. So you've got investment liability, you've got potentially security liabilities with respect to what's going on. If they were supposed to be getting security interest, meaning they get collateral for their investment to try to protect them, you've got problems there. I mean, all those things can arise. So
wow. So that's some good beginning of the year planning. If you're looking at starting up a new business, for heaven's sake, hire a CPA and don't jump in head first. I've known way too many people in my time, especially younger people fresh out of high school. They say, I'm going to start a new business. I'm going to do this and that. And they start out their LLC with the help of their mom or dad or whatever. And the proper planning just isn't there. It's like you say, alter ego, very alter ego.
And the CPA, I'm sure, will tell you that you need to set up a good internal computer means of keeping up with your funds, your income, your revenues, your expenses, whether it's QuickBooks, something very simple that almost anyone can have on their computer, and as you grow, getting to something much larger, much more sophisticated, but have a means of keeping up with. I can't tell you how many very savvy, it's from the standpoint of their service or their industry, businessmen I know who, from the standpoint of the infrastructure of their business, it's just awful, and it causes problems for them all the time because they didn't have proper things set up within their business to be able to account for everything and keep up with everything. I know very successful businesses that bounce checks. Well, why? Because they haven't been following up with where the cash flow is going, and they don't have the systems in place.
And so, I've heard from a very wise person before, if you happen to be the unfortunate target of an audit, you don't want to say, well, I don't know what this, I don't know where this is. I don't know what that is.
Keep your records, have a records retention policy, know how long you need to keep your records, what records you should be maintaining and the like. And truly, that's part of the planning and setting up the structure for the business. If
you can throw some well-organized paperwork at an IRS agent, he's probably already thinking you're probably good to go.
I can't tell you that. Well, I've been in too many situations where we were still discussing the situation after the records. Yes.
Interesting. That's interesting.
But it certainly helps to have the records. It helps to be able to establish things. And I mean, that even goes to, I've been in situations where licenses for the computer systems that a business was using were challenged because a disgruntled employee had gone and reported to the vendor of the technology that they were using unauthorized or had unauthorized users for it. So, you bought 6 licenses, but you got 12 people using them on your computers. Yeah. And so all of a sudden you get into audits with respect to those kind of things. So you've got to have your documentation. You got to make sure you maintain and have some type of retention and recovery period with respect to your electronic data as well, depending on how big you're growing and how fast your business is growing.
I know design firms have an issue with that with Adobe Photoshop because it's a very expensive license, and you need one for every computer and technically every user too. So it's a huge deal trying to keep track of all that, and plus it's expensive and it's a big problem. So that's something that really needs to be looked at.
Right. I've got a question for you, and I've always wondered, if you were in need of legal counsel,
sure,
how would you determine who to hire? What would you do? What resources would you use? Because I wonder where does the public go to consider when they're going to hire somebody? Is it word of mouth? Is it relationship? Is it internet advertising? Is it television advertising? What you, the consumer, or any of the listeners out there, what drives you into the legal market?
That's interesting because I've never been in a situation where I needed a lawyer to defend myself yet, but is an interesting question, because I was thinking about that the other day. How would I find the right lawyer? Obviously, I have the right lawyer in front of me. But if I didn't know you and I'm looking for the right lawyer, right?
Right.
I wouldn't go by TV ads, because that seems like the squeakiest wheel type deal. You know what I mean?
Right.
That doesn't seem like the right course of action for me. I would probably look at online forums, questionnaires. I would probably look online, but I wouldn't do the superficial search where the first ad that comes up is the guy I pick. I would do my research, but that's me. I can't speak for John Q. Public, because obviously the guys on TV get a lot of business.
Well, you can go to bar associations, state and local, to check on compliance, those kind of things about the lawyer that you may be considering. You could there's a direct resource out there called Martindale Hubble that for years, until we got into all this social media, for years was the gold standard, where you look and see how are they rated, by their peers and peer review. But I don't think the public goes to either of those. I think lawyers go to that. If I'm trying to find a lawyer in, let's say, Kalamazoo, Michigan, and I need a counsel there to help me with one of my clients, I'll go to usually the Martindale Hubble and find what firms are there and how are they rated and what this lawyer emphasizes in his practice and what kind of clients are represented by that firm. I can get all that information out of Martindale Hubble, but I don't think the public generally does that. And so I was thinking, what do you, the public, consider? I mean, because you don't know a lawyer's work ethic, which I think is a critical factor. Lawyers are all generally bright individuals. They've been to law school, they've been to undergrad, and they've passed the bar. So they've all every attorney has met some minimum standard. But that doesn't mean that lawyers are all the same. And so, right. I mean, and not just in their areas of practice, but in the way that they practice. How attentive are they? How well do they return calls? How hard do they work? How diligent are they? How imaginative are they? I think the imagination of a lawyer is so critical when they're facing a new situation with a client. And using their imagination to try to get justice if you're in litigation for that client, or trying to avoid major issues in estate planning or use their imagination. Sometimes outside the box, but
within the legal box, though.
Well, you're using legal tools, but not necessarily in what's always been done. But is it always just, I don't know a good lawyer, but I do know a lawyer? I don't know how good they are, but I know a lawyer, and so that's who I go to. I mean, I
think word of mouth is a big factor there, where people say, I don't know a lawyer, but my friend needed one because he or she got in trouble, yada yada. I think that's probably where most of it comes from. Just going by how humans generally work, that right. Seems like how it would be.
So it's all personal referrals.
Probably. If it's not that, then it's someone who's really desperate who sees the ad on the side of a bus.
Because we're seeing so much now. We're seeing lawyers and law firms from outside of Chattanooga trying to come into this area. Mm-hmm. I mean, with the Woodmore tragedy, we've had firms from Texas and from all over the country trying to come in and solicit and try to get business. I understand from some of the things I've read that the Attorney General right now is doing an investigation of some of the activities. We've got all the billboards you see from Knoxville, Birmingham, and other firms that are trying to come into this market. And does that really influence the people of Chattanooga with respect to how they choose an attorney?
I think it means Chattanooga is moving from a smaller market to a medium market in terms of marketability. I think that's what it means from a marketing standpoint, because that's where most of my expertise is. But from a legal standpoint, I think it speaks that people are targeting this area because there have been tragedies that have happened, and there are people who need lawyers who they're hoping will not look locally.
Well, and to tie into that, as you, a consumer or a future consumer, hopefully, of legal services, whether it's preparing your will or whatever, what are your expectations of an attorney? I mean, for example, you go into litigation, at a minimum, there's a 50-50 chance to win. So you go in knowing that there's a chance, because once you put your case into court, if you don't settle, either the jury or the judge is going to decide what happens to your claim or your defense. And so taken it and put it outside of the control of the parties into the hands of the justice system. So you can't say that, well, he's got to win. That can't be your expectation. You want to win.
Right.
But not every case is winnable. And even winnable cases aren't won sometimes because it turns on a witness's choice of words on the stand, to how the Court of Appeals had ruled on a prior case precedent, those kind of things. So what does the public really want from a lawyer?
I guess someone who has personal connections, someone who's, like you say, imaginative. That's very important. This is Legal Bytes. I've been joined here by Jim McCoon. Jim, tell me real quickly how we can get in contact with you if we need you.
423-756-6400, or on the internet, it'd be J McCoon, MCKOON, at mwalawfirm.com.
It's also the website, mwalawfirm.com. Get a look, and you'll see just how great these guys are, because I look at their website. Very well done, I gotta say. I'm very impressed.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
McCoon, Williams & Ashley PLLC offers a full array of legal services to meet the needs of businesses and individuals. Our attorneys represent diverse backgrounds, interests, and legal emphasis, but we share one common goal: providing the highest quality legal services to our clients through the